Good morning, everyone. My name's Eric Devansky. I'm the security architecture lead here at EVOTEK. I'm joined by Ron Eddings, the creative director of education at Axonius. And today we're going to be talking about optimizing vulnerability management with asset intelligence.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Also, thank you, EVOTEK, for hosting this event. I'm really looking forward to speaking to everyone, especially you, Eric. And while we go into this session, I'd like to make this as engaging and informative as possible for everyone. So if there's any questions you have while we get started, drop it into the chat. And if there's also going to be a few polls. So also respond to those if you can. If not, we'll still share the results with everyone. So we titled this presentation, this session, Optimizing Vulnerability Management with Asset Intelligence. There's a lot of challenges that we all face in our careers and our professional, practice of building security programs. And one of the challenges that we face when it comes to vulnerability management and a lot of other aspects of cybersecurity is the asset challenge. Knowing what an asset is, having your assets understood and inventoried, but many other things. And for a second, I want you to imagine that you are a CFO of a bank. And as a CFO, your job is to manage the assets, the financial assets. And your CEO comes to you and they ask you, how much money do we have in the bank? And you say, we have somewhere between 5 to 10 million. That is a big range. And I think that your CEO might be a little upset, especially not having a more specific number. And that's almost a situation that we put ourselves in as cybersecurity practitioners. We go a long time without having a full understanding of how many assets we have at a given moment. During audit and compliance is typically the time that we ask ourselves a question and really go to the depths to understand it. So let's talk about why is it so difficult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question we ask ourselves is, why is asset management so difficult? And so we started with asset management around technology with very few devices. You had some endpoints in your environment, maybe some stateful firewalls, Active Directory, development environment, and endpoint protections. Then we pivoted into VMware and virtualization, which allowed the ability to very quickly scale an environment, very quickly spin up additional servers and assets, and also additionally spin up application and application appliances and items like that. Then we moved into mobile devices with rudimentary mobile device management, but that definitely expanded the attack surface across an environment because now everybody has multiple devices assigned to them that are accessing company data. And then we moved into the cloud, which changed everything because there's multiple surfaces of attack and there's a number of additional systems and services deployed inside of that environment. Then we got into IoT, which introduced its own set of vulnerabilities and challenges inside of an environment. And so at the end of the day, the real challenge here is you can't protect what you can't see. And as the surface and as the number of devices inside of an environment grows, so does the challenge of protecting these things.
So one of the things that I've seen over and over again, whether it's been on the security automation side, security architecture side, is that exact thing that you just described. You can't protect what you can't see. Do you know what you have? And do you know your organization? Do you know your operations? And do you also know your assets that come along with all of that? And one of the challenges that I've seen in all aspects is, one, knowing, but two, are you deployed everywhere you should be? Are there production hosts that you have within your environment that you have very little visibility on? And also, when it comes to vulnerability management, do you have a grasp on it? Are there assets out there that aren't being scanned by vulnerabilities? Are there assets out there that don't have monitoring solutions to understand, the software that's installed on those assets also? Eric, I know that, as a security architect, you help a lot of customers. So what are some of the asset challenges that you've seen working with organizations, and how does it tie into vulnerability management even?
So the big challenge that we have is really around visibility. What's out there in the environment? How is it managed, and what are the vulnerabilities that are on that device? We recently saw this with the Log4j, which I'm sure is fresh in absolutely everybody's mind right now, where we had situations where we just didn't quite know what the vulnerability profile was in the environment, and therefore we couldn't respond effectively without doing some initial discovery. Whereas if we had the ability to drill directly down into individual assets and had that level of visibility, the time to remediation could be significantly shortened.
Right. That is a big one, especially Log4j. That was on the top of everyone's list. And being sure that, whether or not your assets had it or didn't is tough. And then if you did know that your asset has this vulnerability, do you have the ability to respond quickly and promptly to get rid of that vulnerability to potentially save your privacy and data? That is always the challenge. And when we boiled it down, like, there's 6 essential questions that I think everyone should ask about their assets. These questions are going to help you build a security program, help you build a vulnerability management practice around it, and ultimately stay more secure. And the first question is the asset known and managed? Eric already said it best. You can't protect what you can't see. And then where is that asset? Is it in the cloud? Is it on a laptop? Is this a laptop at someone's home? And additionally, what is it? Is it a cloud resource? What kind of cloud resource? When it comes to vulnerability management programs, we often talk about the software that we have installed. Is it up to date? What other software is there? And also, this software being installed, whether it's out of date, whether it's not approved, is this asset adhering to my security policy? This is a tough thing to constantly enforce because policies change and also assets change. What is the
Yes,
biggest question for you, Eric, when it comes to like these 6 essential questions from a security architecture perspective?
so from a security perspective, I really want to know. Number one is really what I want to focus on. Is the asset known? It's that unknown asset in an environment that keeps me awake at night. And then ultimately, how is that asset managed in that environment? So I want to understand from a visibility perspective, tying into our last slide. I want to understand how that asset's known and how that asset's managed in the context of our environment.
Exactly. And to bring order into all of this, there is this new acronym that Gartner introduced. Axonius was using an acronym similar to this, but Gartner took it to the next level and they coined this acronym Chasm. And Chasm is Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. It's really visibility not only on the external attack surface, which is where we typically focus and think about when we say attack surface, but also internal. There is a growing attack surface that we introduce in front of our own organizations through SaaS applications, through digital transformation and using modern infrastructure like containers and going serverless. There's a lot of opportunities to miss that opportunity for visibility. And with Chasm, it's an increased focus on visibility of your assets, which ultimately show your security coverage gaps. It shows misconfigurations, and it also shows vulnerabilities that might exist within your organization. The other component of Chasm, which is one of the pillars that I really love as an automation enthusiast and someone that just can't get enough of automation, is the connection to APIs. There's a lot of tools and resources out there that have information on our assets, but these tools don't speak to each other. And that's the frustrating piece. And Chasm is here to change that a bit. We've already seen technologies like SOAR. We've seen technologies like SIMS, which help aggregate and automate the flow of data. But what about when you need to normalize? There's a lot of times where you'll find yourself in a situation where a field in one solution is going to be different than a field in another solution. IP address is one of the most common examples. Some tools call it IP underscore address. Some call it IP ADDR. But not having that normalization on top is going to make everyone's life difficult. It's almost going to invalidate these opportunities that SOAR presents. But with Chasm, you have this normalization layer on top. If you look at tools like Axonius or really any other tool that focuses on Chasm, there's a layer of normalization, which also creates the opportunity to deduplicate all of those repetitive records that you would see in somewhere like your SIM.
Okay, and so let's get into common use cases. We can break this down into two categories: information technology use cases, things like device discovery, endpoint management, and configuration management, and then we can pivot into security use cases like incident management, vulnerability management, and GRC and audit. The two together provide insight into not only your IT operations but also into your security operations. And with the single pane of glass visibility that you get, it provides the ability to really drill down and understand what's in the environment and how everything connects together.
Excellent. And also, Eric, I am in full screen, so if there's any comments or questions that have come up, definitely let me know. But just driving the slides here, just giving you a heads up there. Great. So one of the things I wanted to also speak about and kind of hear your perspective on it, Eric, is asset management and asset intelligence. There was a slide towards the beginning that said asset intelligence, and some might wonder what exactly is that, and what's the difference between asset intelligence and asset management. When you think of intelligence in the context of cybersecurity, you might think of threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is context about your threats. It's understanding the threat landscape in some way. And asset intelligence is pretty similar to that, but it's context about your assets. It's getting the more granular details about what is within this asset, where is this asset at, and there's a lot of things that you can do with this. You can start to ask more intelligent questions. Where a lot of organizations are or was in this habit of using CMDBs. These are configuration management databases. These CMDBs have information about your assets, but more from a software inventory, more from a hardware inventory, or even a serial number inventory. But with asset intelligence, you get that same level of information, but you also get other context about vulnerabilities. Maybe you've connected to Tenable vulnerability scanner through this Chasm approach. Now you'll have insights into your vulnerabilities that go along with your assets. What about whether or not it's running a public IP address? This is a question that you could ask some tools, but not necessarily all tools. But they all have the context about that asset to allow you to ask that question. So having the asset intelligence is having all of the granular details about each asset and the ability to ask questions on top. So
absolutely.
I was going to ask you, Eric, out of these use cases, which one would be most important to you?
So I think I'd like to do a deep dive into the vulnerability management component of that, and then somewhat related, expand on the attack surface.
Excellent. Let's do it. And we're going to definitely go into a demo of Axonius and show you some of the features that this Chasm approach can help you with. And one of the things that you'll see as we go along this session and also jump into the product is that other tools are collectors for the most part. When you look at a tool like an EDR is collecting information. It also provides the ability to respond. So it's a little bit more than a collector, but it doesn't necessarily aggregate aggregate context from other sources. Is your EDR pulling from AWS? And is AWS pulling from your EDR? Maybe not, but you do need both of those tools. So what is going to bridge the gap for us? It's an aggregator. It's a tool that can collect from multiple sources, not create the need to rip and replace everything, but just give me the ability to finally ask the question of how many assets do I have? And without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into the product. Great. And we're gonna talk about vulnerability management. Eric, you were saying that was one of the use cases. Before we get started and looking into Axonius specifically, I wanted to ask everyone, what is a use case that you think would be helpful for you and your team to solve if you were to take this Chasm approach? Would it be IT and device discovery? Would it be vulnerability management? Maybe some layers of incident response? Would love to hear some of those perspectives of what you would want to solve first, and maybe we can show some of that and give you some ideas as we go along. So when we,
So I know that I'd like to
oh,
focus
go
on
for it.
the vulnerability management component, but very interested in seeing what we get from the audience if we want to drop that into the chat.
Excellent. When I was getting really excited about just talking about Chasm a few minutes ago, one of the reasons was through API integrations. One of the things that I've been advocating for quite a while as a security practitioner is creating the ability for solutions to speak to each other. I'm a huge fan of Python, huge fan of JavaScript, and really anything that can enable me to be a data alchemist, to take seemingly invaluable components of data and string them together to make something valuable. And that's exactly what Axonius provides through adapters. These are integrations between technology solutions. There's so many solutions that have insights on our assets and on our organization. It would just be great to be able to pull all that information in to start to answer some of these tough questions that we weren't previously able to answer. And with Axonius, we have more than 400 adapters. To configure an adapter, it's very simple. We just click on the technology solution and we add a connection. After we add in the API details, Axonius will pull in all of the asset information from those resources and then display all of the connections that you've created, along with how many assets each technology solution responded with. And again, we kind of get this within maybe our SIM. Maybe our SIM is pulling from many different log sources, but the layer of normalization and deduplication is extremely helpful because we filtered down from 200,692 devices to 40,363.
So let's go back and focus on the adapters for a second. I'm very interested in, we have a number of clients in the financial space who use things like an AS400 mainframe. And how does Axonius play with devices that may not have a connector available for them? And how can we integrate that data ultimately into the platform?
That is a great question. And we've all been there, there's always that custom solution that an organization has built, or legacy, or just something that doesn't have an easy to integrate with API. In the best case scenarios, these tools have other interfaces. They might have maybe a SQL interface. We can use things like SQL to connect. We can also do data exports from those types of tools. So we could use things like CSVs to import asset data, but also JSON. There's this ability to define what is within your organization in a more structured way. You could use JSON for that and then import that into Axonius also.
Excellent. That I definitely see the use case there.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about vulnerability management, right? We just looked at how many devices we have. Similarly, we can see how many users we have within Axonius, whether you're using Active Directory, Okta, a combination of both. And, our hope is to uncover some vulnerabilities, to learn something about our organization, or, how can we mature this program? So what type of vulnerability management efforts would you want to take as a practitioner?
So I'd want to see, again, going back to the visibility and back to our Log4j example. I would want to see every single asset in my environment that is vulnerable for Log4j, and have the ability to very quickly respond to those, and very quickly offer up to my leadership and up into our executive level and board exactly what the vulnerability and the attack surface of that vulnerability is, and then understand where those assets are located, what they do, and ultimately prioritize remediation based on that.
Love it. That is great. Let's unpack that a bit, right? What is your strategy for searching for Log4j? Is it based off of a software name? Is it based off of other attributes? Where would you begin with searching for that specific vulnerability?
So I begin looking for the going into my vulnerability scan, looking for the CVE inside of the environment, across all the assets that that are exposed or that would be running Apache and have that vulnerability in the environment.
Absolutely. That's a great place to start. And again, we spoke about Axonius and other Chasm related solutions to be aggregators, so we can aggregate information from our vulnerability scanners. In this environment, I do have a vulnerability scanner. It is Tenable Security Center, so I can use that specific adapter or integration to search for that level of information. But within Axonius, I can also search across all of my solutions. There might be another solution like an EDR, for instance, or a monitoring solution that lets us know what software we have installed, which might also lead to understanding that you have that CVE within that asset. But we can use the aggregated field, and I can type in CVE, and I have multiple ways that I can search for CVEs. Some teams might want to search for severity and highlight all of the critical severity CVEs, but we can also search based off of the CVE ID. We can have like CVE ID contains, maybe there's this block of CVEs that you're looking for, but we could use things like regex, but in our case, we could just say equals to a specific CVE. So what is the ID that we're looking for?
The CVE ID for Log4j, I believe, is 44228.
Oh, okay, great. I got it. Awesome. Type that in a bunch. So let's go ahead and search across all of our assets for this specific CVE. It looks like in my environment, it's a good thing. There's no assets with this specific CVE. And the interesting bit about doing a search like this is it provides this sense of security, knowing that this number is 0. But what if this number were 1 tomorrow? Would I go back and search for this CVE again? Do I have some type of automated solution to bring this to my attention? And do I want to know about it every single time, or is there thresholds that I want to build around just getting all the CVE information? As you build a vulnerability management program, I'm sure a lot of us have been there. There will be a lot of CVEs to wrangle, and you don't want to just try to send all of those bits of information to one team member that has to fix hundreds of CVEs. But in any case, we can use this search in Axonius and save it. We can call it log4j vulnerabilities. And from here, we can start to put this in the dashboards, but we can also build automation around it within Axonius. Before building that automation, though, I did want to show one other aspect of searching for vulnerabilities. I think you kind of alluded to it a bit, Eric, and that's based off of software. This is ultimately software that's installed on an asset. And within Axonius, we can search for specific software names, software versions, or a combination of both. And we can use things like regex and also ranges to start to search for specific versions that are earlier or later than a vulnerable instance of that specific piece of software. Great. So since we didn't have a search on that, any asset results on that, before we build automation, Eric, what's another vulnerability or a strategy for identifying vulnerabilities that you'd want to employ in your vulnerability management program?
Well, why don't we zoom out a little bit, Ron? I would like to understand a little bit more about you. You touched on this earlier. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what all the critical vulnerabilities are in my environment. Um, so why don't we start there, and why don't we take a look at how we can see exactly what not only the vulnerabilities that are present, but also the kind of the age and the location of those are, so we can judge the efficacy of our remediation around just overall vulnerabilities there.
Let's do it. There's a few different ways that we could, approach this. We could search for specific severity of CVEs, or we can search for another attribute that is provided within a CVE. But we really are talking about criticals. So let's just start there. And from that 40,000 assets, we do have 76 critical vulnerabilities within our assets. 76 devices that have critical vulnerabilities. And one of the other insightful bits about using a product like Axonius is understanding which solutions see each asset. One of the examples that I provided in the beginning was, what are the unmanaged production hosts? What production hosts are missing this ability to even see CVEs? Maybe there's production hosts that are missing Tenable as their security scanner. So after we start to get insight about these critical vulnerabilities, we can go back and make sure that there's no coverage gaps. We can go and say, hey, I want to see all of our AWS assets. We could say anything that has an Amazon ID, anything that displays an AWS. And then we can say, show me everything in Tenable that is also in AWS, but show the inverse now. Show me all of my AWS resources that are missing a Tenable ID. So out of the, let's see how many there were altogether. There was 2,000 AWS resources, and about 100 of them were not running Tenable. And this can be very insightful bit of information to know that you have 76 devices that have critical vulnerabilities, but how many do you not know about? There might be quite a bit. This would be one of my strategies, is going back to these 700 devices and seeing what is the reason behind me not having AWS installed. Tenable Security Center installed. And there's also another bit that is kind of insightful, is what out of these devices that don't have Tenable, which have public IPs, which are publicly facing and also presenting a bit more of a problem. So now you can start to ask all of these questions that you typically would have to go to several solutions to ask, and get it all in one place and really just be able to move forward and take action on this information.
And that really speaks to the visibility component of our presentation here. That, as a security practitioner, the thing that keeps me up at night is the device that misses our vulnerability scanner, the device that misses the tools in place to detect and report these things. And it really speaks to the value of visibility and being able to see not only where I'm hitting the mark and where I'm scanning and detecting vulnerabilities, but also where I'm not. And being able to report that back up is tremendously powerful for making sure that my environment is covered and that I'm seeing an accurate picture of what's going on inside of it.
Absolutely. And, then being able to pivot into a device and then see more information, being able to see not only what does each solution say about this device. There's definitely times where we see that one solution has outdated information, or it's just slightly inconsistent. One has caps, one has lowercase. There's this extra .local at the end of the asset name. So there's always going to be a level of differences between each technology solution that you have. But then we can look at this aggregated view to see what are the most consistent views about this device. What is the public IP? What is the private IP addresses that it contains? And also some of the other attributes like network interfaces. We can see installed software, if there's some type of software monitoring solution installed, and even hard drive and firewall rules. There's a lot of information about these assets that ultimately security practitioners need, but we just have to go to many different places to get that information. And I'm sure no one wants to use a single pane of glass, but also you probably don't want multiple glasses of pane. You don't want to have to go to many different solutions. And in some cases, after you build your rules, you might not even want to have to search for this information over and over again in Axonius. And that is where the enforcement center comes into play. So there's always going to be an action that you take after you get information, whether it's I'm going to ignore it or I'm going to do something about it. Either way, that's an action. And we want to automate some of those things. If they don't necessarily apply to our team, we're not responsible for fixing it, or we want to just immediately get rid of the issue. There's actions that we can take in Axonius, like creating incidents and case management solutions, sending notifications via email, Slack, or other means, but also taking action directly based off of the technology solution that found that violation or bit of insight in the first place. A lot of organizations I've worked with, especially when they're onboarding automation, they don't necessarily go all in immediately. They might start with creating incidents in a case management solution and then slowly work their way into other types of automated actions. Let's go ahead and create enforcement. With each action, especially when you're doing something like creating a case in another solution, if it's already configured within Axonius, we can just use the adapter credentials, or we can add in another set of credentials to use, and we can start to add in the incident information. So if this information is about AWS public IPs without vulnerability scanners, then we can start to outline that information as the incidents are created in our case management solution.
Definitely see the value in this, giving a real-time view into as environments begin to grow and expand, and as new services are spun up, being able to get notifications about missing components of a security program or missing components around a vulnerability scanner is tremendous in terms of just expanding on that visibility theme that we've been talking about throughout.
Absolutely. And there's also other layers of automation that teams want. And, sometimes you won't want to report everything at once. Maybe you do, but you only want that to happen once per day or twice per day. We can start to define these search schedules, or just have it be on demand, but we can apply additional conditions on top. So don't let the teams get flooded with cases. But if there's 2 or more assets that have been seen since I previously searched, then let the team know. So we can start to add on additional logic on top of there too. Great. So we still have a bit of time for questions or for more examples. I will let you lead, Eric.
Okay, well, I was going to ask if we could go back and look at this alert we just created, and if we can actually see a real-time view of our environment and whether or not we have a vulnerability present in there.
Absolutely. So there is a few different things that we can do, right? One of the opportunities was creating an enforcement. If we created a new enforcement, we can run it, and if there was a asset seen that was against that AWS violation query that I created, then that action would have been triggered. If we wanted just really a real-time view to get a high-level understanding of, hey, I logged into Axonius, let me see what's going on, then we can use dashboards. And with dashboards, we have these charts. We can apply the we could apply the searches that we created in the dashboard charts. So let me go ahead and add one here. We created one for that's for our devices, and our search was finding log4j. And there's a few different ways to view that type of information within Axonius. Some, in some instances, you'll just want a number. In other instances, you'll want a graph to see the total percentage and then be able to pivot into that dashboard chart and see the breakdown in the form of a table. Well, what we can do is we can compare two searches. We can compare to see, show me all of my devices, and then show me the devices that have that log4j vulnerability. And you'll see a graph on that specific metric. Another thing that you'll see in a lot of organizations is just understanding that those coverage gaps, how many devices don't have security, vulnerability scanning enabled. We can also do comparisons based off of that. But if we wanted to save this chart, we can. Let's show another chart that actually has some type of difference. And I will type in vulnerability, missing vulnerability scans on Windows hosts. This might not be a good comparison. We want to use Windows hosts as our comparison. How many devices are running Windows and how many devices are missing vulnerability scanning on Windows devices? So if we wanted real-time view, we could use dashboards to get that level of information.
Awesome. So we have a couple other questions from the chat here. To start off, Ron, how can Axonius help with the software bill of materials or SaaS application inventories?
That is a great question. We actually have some exciting news coming out next week to really show that off. It's new features, of course. What I can tell you is Axonius can help you with a few things when it comes to SaaS. It can help you with identifying your SaaS applications, the ones that you know about, and also the ones that you don't know about. That happens all the time. Like, we think we have a good grasp on our SaaS applications, but you learn that marketing, HR, or even your developers has spun up this instance of a solution without letting other teams know. So the first bit is SaaS visibility. The second bit is understanding shadow users. There's a lot of times where we'll find that a SaaS application is sidestepping our SSO provider. And, just knowing what is the severity of that. Is this an allowed case or is this not? And what is also the extent? Are all of my SaaS applications have the support to create a user manually? And is there a lot of manual users in those applications? Axonius can also help with that. And the last bit is SaaS spend. We have a very good grasp on how much we spend in AWS, but we don't really have a good grasp on how much we spend in other solutions that don't cost as much. So understanding, hey, I have this many users and 10% of them haven't logged in within the past year, I'm probably using a lot of spending on SaaS application for a user that doesn't have any intention on using it. So Axonius can help with those three areas, and we'll have more details to show next week, along with videos that are going to be pushed on the website.
Excellent. I'm going to be interested to see that. The next question we have is: Can a policy violation be further pushed if a lien or risk acceptance is needed for the vulnerability?
Let's break that down. So Eric, I would love for you to help me out with that question. How would you kind of unwrap that and put it into a technical component?
Absolutely. So say I have an application that has a vulnerability. However, the organization, for whatever reason, has chosen to accept that vulnerability rather than remediate it. Let's say that vulnerability has appeared on another system that runs the same application, and so we need to expand the scope of our risk acceptance around that application. Can that be captured and reported?
Okay, I see. Yes, and that's a great question. There's a few different ways to approach that. What comes to my mind is building searches around that. So part of the demo, I created a save search. And this save search can also be an exception. I can call this save search, hey, I am okay with these assets without that have this exception. And there's a way to quickly give assets exceptions. If you find that there's a one three assets within maybe 200 that should get this exception, we can tag these devices. We can say, we can add a tag and we can specify what that tag is. We can call this tag security exception. And as we add this tag in, we can also add in an expiration date. We don't want, hopefully, these security exceptions forever. Maybe we'll give them a year. You'll get them a quarter until your next audit. You can now, specify that date. And let's just keep it 30 days, keep it simple, and add this to our search. And now what we can do is add in a tag and exclude those devices from our search. So we can say any devices that have a specific tag, start to exclude. And what we can also do is search for how many devices have we given exclusions to, since we can use that tagging feature as one of our search options. So let's go ahead and type in tag. And we can start to, add this tag into other searches, but also start to see how many devices over time contain this tag. And one thing that I did not show, let me actually just click security exception here real quick, is that we can also display a date. So we can see how many devices had this tag last week. In our case, it will be 0. But how many devices had this tag on Thursday? We'll see this as a different metric. And we'll also be able to use these metrics to display time charts within our dashboards and also send out these dashboards in the form of reports if we'd like.
Excellent. And then in terms of these, in terms of the dashboards, can we take a look, do a little bit deeper dive into the how these can these be exported into reports that we can send up to our executives, or do they have a portal login? How does that component work?
Absolutely. So as you build the biggest piece, and I think the most important thing, and this is what a lot of teams did around the sim, is they built a very solid foundation on searches. They had a search for everything. And that is what we call scoping queries in Axonius, is breaking out the Windows devices in a safe search, breaking out the Windows devices with a specific attribute as a safe search. This is kind of scoping out your environment and breaking it into components. And as we build reports, we can use those components that we created, all of those safe searches, and start to do something with them. So I can create a new report, and we can call this vulnerability breakdown. And we can start to use the charts that were in our dashboards. So I can go to any of the dashboards that I created and include that entire dashboard, all of the charts within it. Or I can specify I only want to show a specific search, this log4j vulnerability that's keeping me up at night. So we can mix and match. We can include everything, throw the kitchen sink in a report, or just specific attributes and dashboard spaces. So let's look at what an example looks like. We'll save this report. It will be generated. It's going to do a search across Axonius. And once it's done, we'll be able to download it within Axonius. But you can also automatically email this to other team members if that's the intention also.
Awesome. So I see the definitely the value in being able to target the information delivered and to really build out that visibility across the environment and for the relevant team members and people. Very cool. I think we have time for one more here. It's one more question. Let's see. It's clear that Axonius is a huge asset in the asset discovery journey, but can you speak to the importance of this control in the vulnerability management landscape?
Absolutely. There's the vulnerability landscape is always going to evolve. There's always going to be other attributes that go into making an asset vulnerable. You know, previously when things were a lot more simple, there was fewer devices, everything was not virtualized. There wasn't really that many opportunities to uncover attacks, but there also wasn't as many types of attacks. With Axonius, we can start to use the new bits of context that help us discover attacks. So, for example, being able to search based off of software name is a classic way to find vulnerabilities. Being able to search based off of CVEs, another classic way. But what about version numbers? That is typically a harder thing to start searching off of, and also other attributes about your application, whether or not a specific device is within a specific AWS region or security zone. Those elements lead to vulnerabilities also. Knowing that this device can be accessed by the internet and it's also not hardened, you know, these are just layers that organizations have that get peeled back by attackers, but we can start to build a strong perimeter, but also a strong infrastructure and security posture for all of our assets.
Fantastic. Well, I believe we're at time. Ron, I'd like to thank you for your time today, walking through Axonius and this vulnerability and this visibility use case. Our contact information is in the reception. If anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, please feel free to reach out. And thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.